Graphing straight lines, going from a rule to a table to a graph. We know that straight line graphs show a relationship between two variables. So for example, if I've got 10 litres of water for my hike and I use 2 litres of water each day, there's a relationship between the number of days I've been hiking and how much water I've got left. I would start with 10 litres of water and I would lose 2 litres for every day. Now if the number of days was X and the amount of water I had left was Y, then I'd have a rule. I could also write this rule like this: Y equals negative 2X plus 10. Either of those represents the same situation. A straight line graph is a relationship between Y and X. When we're asked to graph a line, our steps are that we make a table of values, we plot the points, we graph them, and then we rule a line through the points, arrows at either end, label our line with the rule, and you can see from my example, this 10 is my starting point. When X is 0, I start at this point, and the coefficient of X, the number in front of it that it's multiplied by, is my rate of change. So I'm dropping 2 litres per day. So the rule has a lot of meaning. So if I'm asked to graph that rule, that line, a table of values has X and Y, and we have different values of X. It's like a what-if table. We'll usually start with -1 up to 3. Good idea to start at the 0, because we know the starting point at 0. It's going to be this 10, because at 0 days, I had 10 litres, but we can check. Substitute 0 into the X. -2 times 0 is 0, plus 10 is 10. Substitute 1 in. It's best to start at 0 and move up into the positives. You get the pattern more easily. -2 times 1 is -2, plus 10 is 8. And this makes sense. Look at the pattern. At the start, I had 10 litres. After 1 day, I'll have 8 litres. And you don't need to keep substituting in really carefully. You can see the pattern, can't you? This is the pattern. Drop 2 every X. Down 2 litres every day. And you can follow the pattern back. Or you can substitute in. You can always use your calculator if you want. -2 times -1 plus 10, 12. Of course we can see our pattern. Then we plot the points. -1, 12. It's not on the graph. It doesn't matter as long as we get 2 or 3 points that are on the graph. 0, 10, 1, 8, 2, 6, 3, 4. Use your ruler. Absolutely fill the whole graph, especially showing where the line cuts through both axes, because that tells me that my hike could only be 5 days long or I'd run out of water. So the relationship lets us discover things. Rule the line, arrows at either end to show that it keeps going, and write the rule next to the line. Y equals -2X plus 10. So that's our steps for graphing lines. You will need to practice it, but it should make sense to you. Now, it's worth noting that the gradient of the graph, here's a new word, gradient, the slope, can be negative. This is negative change. It is dropping over the graph. It can be positive. It can slope upwards. If the coefficient of X is negative, your graph is going to slope downwards. if the coefficient of x is positive, your graph will slope upwards. It will be an increase change. We'll learn more about the gradient later. Because there's two types of lines, horizontal and vertical lines, that we should also mention. I'm going to put a horizontal line here where y equals 2. I'm going to put a vertical line in here where x equals negative 2. These lines have different rules and they're easier to graph. Look at this line. It passes through y equals 2. Everywhere on this line, y equals 2. It doesn't matter what x is, y is always 2. Y equals 2. Everywhere on this line, x is negative 2. It doesn't matter what y is, this line is x is negative 2. The thing that can confuse people is that the x-axis is horizontal, but an x line is vertical. A y equals line is horizontal, but the y-axis is vertical. But if you think about the rule, y is always 2, it kind of makes sense. Now this one has a 0 gradient because there's no slope, and this one we actually can't say what the slope is. It's infinite or it's undefined. Don't worry too much about gradient and slope, we'll come back to them. So the rule, of course, for horizontal and vertical lines, x equals a number, we will have a vertical line. Y equals a number, horizontal line. And they don't have x and y in them, they've just got one or the other. I'd better call this a number, hadn't I? So the steps are, just mark the point on the axis that is given by the rule, and graph a line that cuts through the axis. So if I need to graph y equals negative 4, mark the point at y equals negative 4 and a line that goes through that axis. Arrows at either end, label your line. Y equals negative 4. X equals 2. Put a point at x equals 2. Graph a line that goes through that axis. Label your line. And the only one that can get kind of confusing is x equals 0. It can be hard to see which way this needs to go, but when you think about it, an x line has to be vertical. X equals 0 is going to go along the y-axis and can be quite tricky to graph. So that's horizontal and vertical lines and graphing lines. So you've learned a lot. Well done.